In this video I'm going to show you briefly how I put this together. This is not as shot in camera, this is actually a 2-image panorama. So if I show you the 2 images that went together to combine this, you may understand why. So this is the first image where I've got space above the trees to get the skyline in, but I felt it was a bit too there's not enough information at the bottom of the image, so I shot a second image slightly lower down just to get that photo. So the way I put this together was to start off by selecting those 2 images and then doing a photo merge panorama in Lightroom. So I just right click on one of the images, go to photo merge and panorama. The other way of doing this is to go to photo merge and panorama on there as well, or you can just click on the main image to do the same thing. Now notice I'm in the library module here, so you don't need to be in develop. A couple of key things about this is I've got auto settings switched on, so this will automatically do the auto toning. Now in this dialog we've got a number of options here for the projection. This is using the spherical projection, so imagine that you're shooting a multi-image panorama and you're on the center point of a sphere, and that's what that's doing. Then we have a cylindrical version, which is where you're just rotating horizontally around your body. And then a final one, which in this case gives a better projection, I should say, is perspective. Now you may find if you start doing these that one of these projections will work better than the others. Just because this works best with projection here, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be projection which is the correct perspective will be the correct projection to use. Then we have a couple of other options that we can do after we've done the merge. We can do an auto crop, which will just get rid of these white edges like that, which is what I think I did. We have this thing here called boundary warp, and what this will do, this will stretch the image to fill in those white areas. And then the final one that we've got is this thing called fill edges. And what this does a content aware fill on those 2 edges. It's not always that successful, as you can see here. We've clearly got repeating patterns here, and I've no idea what this is going on this side here. But you don't have to use just one of these. We could, for example, do a 50% boundary warp and then do an auto crop. So you can combine these if you want to. But I think on this one I just did an auto crop. And then all I did was we just click on merge and we get a resulting image. At this point it would have done some auto toning in here, so it would have set all these settings, and I would have then just sent this over into Photoshop. So we'll do that. Now one question that I was asked is I always choose edit original. Well, I don't always choose edit original. Sometimes I will choose edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and other times I might just choose edit a copy. There's 2 reasons why I'm choosing edit original in this example. One is because I want to show you what I've done on the photo. And the other is if I bring it back into Lightroom and I do some further developing, then I might decide, oh, do you know what, I should have done something else in Photoshop. So I can then go back into Photoshop and not lose my Lightroom edits. They can still be changed. So we'll take this into Photoshop. This will just take a moment or 2 to start up. And here's the photo. Now if we look at the photo, this is how it would have come in from Lightroom. Now there's a couple of things that we need to fix in here. first of all, I'd like to get rid of these buildings here on the left hand side, and the second thing is right in the middle here we've got a bit of a sort of a haziness. I don't know if that was a water drop or something, and we've got a few shiny parts down here in the photo that I'd like to remove. So the first thing I did was to do something about the sky, and this was a little bit of HDR. I'm going to show you HDR in another video, so I'm not going to go into it here. And then I wanted to do something about these buildings. And this is a problem because, you know, the first thought was, well, let's just clone something else in. So I started to look around to see if I could find something in this image that was going to give me the right kind of tone, the right kind of perspective for anything that I was going to clone in here to get rid of the buildings. And I couldn't find anything in here that was going to work. But while I was up in Scotland shooting this, I also took this photo. And this does have a perspective of the trees receding into the background, and tonally they would be right as well. So what I did with this was I just went, after doing some tonal adjustments, went and did edit in Photoshop. Now there are a number of ways of stacking these images, but I'll show you the way that I do it. But I know there are other ways. So to do this, what I did was I went to select all, edit, copy, and then I went over to my the other image, clicked on the layer below which I want this new layer to appear, and then I went to edit and paste, and that puts my image as a new layer. As you can see here, it's a new layer. So excuse me. So what we need to do now is just align this to cover the houses. So what I usually do is drop my opacity down to around 50%, and then we'll choose the move tool and move this over, so I can use the trees then to hide the buildings, and about there is going to be okay. So we'll push the opacity back up again, and then what I need to do is I need to mask this out so I can paste in the trees that I want. So with this, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, and this creates a black mask. Then we'll just use a white brush to brush out the areas that I want to draw back. And so all we're doing here, this is a soft brush, and so all I'm just going to do is just paint it, paint on the mask. Obviously we make sure the mask is selected, and we just bring the trees back that I want to appear in here. Now I'm going to do this rather roughly and crudely, but obviously you don't want the electricity pylon, or maybe you do, I don't know, but you'd be a little bit careful about bringing that back. And the reason for doing it this way is because then I can click on this layer again and choose the move tool, and I can adjust this layer around. Oops, let's click on the white layer first. There we go. I can move this layer around to get it to line up just how I want it. The alternative way of doing this, if I delete this layer, is to create a new blank layer, and then what I can do is I can choose the clone stamp tool and choose an area in here as my source, and then back on my blank layer I can then just clone in what I want. The downside to that is that I have to be very careful what I pick in here, and I have to hope that I can make this merge in cleanly and without showing any obvious signs that I've done stuff. So the way I did it was as I say, to create a new layer, and then I can then move that as I desire. and so that gave me this. So this leaves me then with the last thing that I need to do, which is to do something about the sky to darken that down and get rid of these shiny areas on here. And to do that, we're going to do a little bit of dodging and burning. Now, Photoshop has a dodging and burning tool, which is this is the dodge tool, and it also has a burn tool. We also have a sponge tool, which I'm not going to cover in this video. So we have these dodge and burn tools, but those need to work on a single layer. And so what I want to do is I want to create a single layer out of these three layers that I've got activated. And the way you do that is to hold down Control, Alt and Shift, or Command, Shift and Option on the Mac and press E. There's no menu option for this, so you need to know that magic keystroke. And this gives me a stamped layer and leaves these other ones still active. This is useful because if I make a mess of doing work on here, I can just delete this layer and create a new one by merging those three again. And then we just use the burn tool, because I'm going to, is it the burn tool? Is it, yeah, the dodge tool? No, the burn tool, I was right. Because we're going to darken some areas in here. And so what we can do is pull the exposure down up here to around 50% or even lower, and then we can just paint in here just to darken these areas. And the reason for doing it on the water is because there's a couple of potential areas of hotspots, but I want to do it on the rocks because I want to get rid of that shine. There is a downside in using this and for doing this sort of work, is that if you keep going over the same spot, even by a little bit, it can get quite dark, so it sometimes can be quite hard to manage. But the biggest reason that I don't use this personally is if we see in this sort of light misty area in the middle of the trees, if you watch this tree that's in its autumn colours, as I try to get rid of this faint highlight just to merge it into the other, you can see that it's also doing that tree that's in autumn colours, and it's really having quite a harsh impact on it. Now I know I could drop the exposure down, but it's still going to ultimately have that same harsh impact. So I don't do it this way. So let me get rid of this layer. Actually no, I'll keep this layer, but I will hide it and I'll show these other three layers. So what I do is I will create a new blank layer and set my blend mode to soft light. And now I can just use a normal brush, and we can paint in either black or white. In this case I'm going to paint in black. Make sure that we have a soft edge, and I'm going to pull my opacity down to around 50%. So this means that while I keep holding the mouse button down and keep painting, it will never get more than 50% dark, unlike the burn tool, which will just get progressively darker. I'm also going to pull my flow down to around 30%. So opacity will set the limit as to how much of the effect I apply with the brush, and the flow will set a limit on as to how quickly it gets applied. So if we make this brush a bit bigger and we'll paint over here, you can see that it doesn't matter how many times I paint over the same area, it never gets that dark. And to get to the full 50%, I have to paint over the same area while I'm holding the brush down 3 times. So if I just do it once, I get an amount. If I do it a second time, I get a little bit more, and a third time it gets a little bit darker. And so this gives me much finer control over my dodging and burning. So I tend not to use the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop because I find It just doesn't give me sufficient control. Now if we come up here into the trees, now I can paint this, and you can see that the effect it has on the tree and autumn colours is a lot less than it is with the dodge and burn tools. Now that's got really quite dark, whereas in here it hasn't, and I've got rid of that kind of that haziness due to the water droplet on the lens. And so that's why I don't use the dodge and burn tool. And then what we can then do is just go up into the sky, and we can pull this down. Maybe we'll pull the opacity up a little bit to around 70% or so, and then we can just paint in here just to darken that sky. And that's really well, not really how I did it, that is how I did it, and this was my end result. Now I think I might have moved this layer here, which I used for doing the HDR effect, which is why we've got a funny looking halo around there, but I'm going to show you how you do HDR in another video. From this I then took it back into Lightroom, and I think all I did in here, so I just cropped it and added so I didn't even crop it, I added a vignette just to darken the edges down, and we do the vignette just by going to the effects panel in Lightroom and then just pulling the amount and midpoint sliders, these 5 or 6 sliders here, to give me the effect that I want. And that's how I put this photo together.